before the deadly surprise attack, I sat down with Governor Ron DeSantis Friday at the governor's mansion in Florida for his first network Sunday show appearance. Governor, thank you for having us here at the mansion, which is a beautiful place. It's your home. It's an office. It's kind of a dual purpose for your young family.
And you have roots in Tallahassee, so welcome.
I do. Thank you. It's good to be home. Let's start. We'll talk about Florida, but let's start first where you've served before in Washington, where the House is in a bit of disarray. You were a House member who was one of the co-founders of the Freedom Caucus. Could you have foreseen a scenario where we are now, where conservatives in the House have ousted a Republican speaker, and there are serious divides within the party? How would you heal them?
Well, look, at the end of the day, you got to be focused on results. And what I've seen up there in Washington for both parties is a lot of theater. There's a lot of things that are done. It's performative, but it's not ultimately leading to anything. And the contrast between what's going on there and, say, with Florida is, I'm not running a soap opera down here. I'm not an entertainer. My job is to be the leader, to be able to lay out a vision, execute that vision, and deliver results. And so as president, I'll provide the leadership. We know that what we're going to need to go to tackle the budget, tackle the border wall and the southern border, all these key issues. But we're going to be judged by what we deliver for the American people. You know, the people that are struggling to buy groceries, the people that can't afford a mortgage or can't afford a new car, they don't really care who the Speaker of the House is. They just want to see the job get done. And we got to not focus so much on what's happening inside D.C. and focusing what's happening throughout the rest of the country.
We talked a lot about your record here in Florida, but the fact is you had a veto-proof Republican supermajority for getting things done. Washington is much different. There are fractions within the party, and obviously, but with the parties at each other's heads across the aisle. How would you govern there? What's your pitch to voters who say, yes, getting it done here is one thing, but that's a very divided situation?
Well, first of all, I did not have veto-proof my first 4 years. We earned veto-proof majorities by winning the biggest re-election victory that a Republican governor has ever had in the history of the state of Florida. We delivered results. The people responded. And we took Florida from being a very competitive state politically, a one-point state, to now making it one of the strongest Republican states. And, of course, we're leading on the policy. So we earned the opportunity to do that. The first 4 years, we didn't necessarily have that. So how is it about? It's not about me. It's not about personalities of the legislative leadership. It's a bottom-up approach. Your vision resonates with the people, and then the people tell the representatives, get in line. President Reagan did not have a Republican House at all when he came in. And what did he do? He went over the heads of the people, of the legislators, spoke directly to the people, and people said, you know what? This country's going in the wrong direction. Work with the president, and let's turn things around. The majority of the public knows this country is in a state of decline. And so we need to reverse the decline. We need to usher in an American revival. What we did in Florida is a model that can work for the country.
Some of the things that you've done in Florida are tied up in legal fights, not surprisingly. Let's talk about the fact that the Supreme Court has taken up the social media law that you have here in Florida, a similar one as well, they'll consider out of Texas. Essentially, the premise is that social media companies would be unable to ban, restrict, or remove most content. They'd have to explain what their censorship or their policy plans are. Opponents argue that the First Amendment means not only that people have the freedom to say what they want, but that you can't force people to host or support an idea that they don't. One of the opponents of the Texas law said it would force Americans everywhere to endure racial epithets, aggressive homophobia, pornographic material, beheadings, or other gruesome content, just as they're scrolling around online. So as the First Amendment protects free speech, it also prohibits the government from telling entities what they have to do and what they have to say or endorse.
Well, I'd say two different things. One, I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, for example, they have a right as private companies to decide what rules they want to do. They got to apply those rules evenly. And what the social media companies have been doing is they've been disfavoring conservative voices. So they tell you it's an open platform. They get liability protection from the federal government because they claim to be open platforms, but yet they don't operate that way. So our bill was basically allowing people that had been disfavored to bring a consumer fraud action against them because they were given a representation of this. First thing. Second thing, we have to grapple with the fact that these big tech companies colluded with the federal government to stifle dissent on COVID. If you put up an article in March of 2020 saying COVID came from the Wuhan lab, they would take it down and censor it. If you criticize lockdowns, they would take it down and censor it. They censored the Hunter Biden laptop story at the behest of the federal government. The federal government cannot subcontract out violations of the First Amendment to private companies. You can't do indirectly what the Constitution forbids you to do directly. So I think those two factors make it different. If you want to start a private company and you want to be a publisher, you have the right to publish what you want or not want. But these are companies that are getting benefits from the government to protect them from liability, and they're turning around and working with the government. So I think the Supreme Court needs to resolve this. We knew this was going to go to the Supreme Court. I said it when I signed the bill because this is a case of first impression. Texas's law was upheld in the Fifth Circuit. Ours was not in the 11th. The Supreme Court will resolve it. But what we have to recognize is we have a public square now that's largely digital. And so I want robust First Amendment speech. I want people to be able to express themselves and debate issues. And when you have one of the most consequential things that's ever happened to this country, COVID lockdowns, and these companies were censoring a discussion about whether that was the right thing to go, that is not good for a republic.
Do you worry that some of the culture fights get so much attention that they overshadow other things that you want to talk about?
I don't think so, because I think if people fairly look at what I've done as governor and then what I talk about on the campaign trail, the number one thing I talk about is people are paying too much for everything. People are falling behind. The American dream has slipped away. In Florida, we're one of the few states where we've had a big increase in personal income. We have no income tax, of course. We have a big budget surplus. Since I've been governor, we've paid down almost 25% of our state's total debt while cutting taxes and being the number one state for new business formations. And so we have a record second to none on all those issues. I do think, though, some of these cultural issues affect things far beyond whatever. I mean, for example, we had the fight about the gender ideology in the elementary schools. We can't, as a country, succeed if kindergartners are being taught that their gender's a choice or that they can change, they were born in the wrong body. That's just wrong. And so, yes, I'm the father of a 6'5" and a 3-year-old. My wife and I are sensitive about what's going on in the schools, but I also think this society needs to be rooted in truth. And so many of these fights are based on things that are just not true, and we have a responsibility to fight back. The truth will set you free.
I was at a gathering of women the other night, very informal, off the record, but one of the women said, I think it's terrible in Florida that they're banning books. She has a child who is in the LGBTQ community and said, I don't want my child to go somewhere like that. I think that they're afraid, and the message that they've gotten is that teachers will be punished for talking about non-traditional families and families like hers.
Well, first of all, there's not a single book that's been banned in the state of Florida. That is a media hoax. To take a book out of a fourth grade classroom that's pornographic because it's not appropriate for kids of that age, it's not banning the book. You're free to do that as an adult if that's what you want to do.
But banned from certain classrooms and age groups.
Well, but you have to make decisions about what's appropriate for curriculum. We would have never said, even 10, 15 years ago, that it was appropriate to have X-rated material. Some of these books are X-rated. In fact, I did a press conference to expose this, and we said it was exposing the book ban hoax. I played images on a screen of the books that the parents objected to. The local news cut their feed. They said it was too graphic to air on TV. Well, if it's too graphic for the 6 o'clock news, how is it okay for a sixth grader? It's not. And then the other thing is about what teachers can say or not. Look, a teacher should not be instructing a second grader that their gender is a choice. There are not a lot of parents in this country that want to send their kid to second grade and have that. They need to be focusing on math, they need to focus on reading, they need to be focused on science. So I think what we're doing is really vindicating what education should be. It should not be a hobby horse for the school systems to impose an agenda on the kids. It should be about preparing them for life.
I wanted to talk to you about a piece in the Washington Post did a deep dive on you and your wife, the first family. And they said this: he wields fear like a currency in Tallahassee. The city is small. I grew up here. I went to law school not far from here. It is a small town in that people know each other's business and they do talk. Do you think people are afraid of you? Do you want them to be afraid of you as the governor?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that's just rhetorical flourish, but I think we've been very successful because when I say I'm going to do something, people know I'm going to do it. I don't bluff. I don't mess around. I follow through, and I find a way to get things done. And so I think people just respect that. I think they also know that I've had the people on my side on all these big fights. You know, we probably got in more fights in Florida where the left and the media were on one side, and people thought, oh, you're taking on water, they're attacking you. But you know what? the silent majority was on my side. And so I think they've seen that play out, and I think they'd rather be on my side on these fights than be on the other side.
But are legislators and people here afraid to oppose your ideas or to speak up for fear of what they, this piece suggests that you and your allies would do to their political careers?
I think that's a little bit too much. But I think the issue is if you go to their districts and you talk to their voters are going to tell them, I want you supporting the governor. You better be backing the governor on these things. So it's really a bottom up. It's really no different than when Reagan was in and he inspired grassroots to pressure legislators. Our voters here trust me to do the right thing. And if I set out a course, they want to see the legislature follow.
Up next, more from my exclusive sit-down interview with Governor Ron DeSantis, including a discussion about a topic where he's taking a lot of heat, Ukraine. GOP candidates, including Governor DeSantis, are campaigning across Iowa again this week. Today marks 99 days until the first in the nation Iowa caucuses. And DeSantis is vowing to visit all of the state's 99 counties, hoping to score an early upset over frontrunner former President Trump. The next Republican presidential primary debate is 1 month from today in Miami. More now with my exclusive sit-down in Florida with the governor. President Trump leading in the national polls, average of about 45%. There is a lot of room for improvement for all the campaigns other than his in trying to catch up. Hillary Clinton has a new interview out in which she describes Trump followers as a cult that needs to be formally deprogrammed. Your reaction?
That is deplorable. I mean, she is part of the reason why this country is so divided. I mean, to attack people that support a candidate just because you couldn't get the job done and you're still bitter about that. But we need to stop casting aspersions on people that disagree with us. Look, people that support the former president are patriotic Americans. I think he's got, a good following. I think that you're going to see a lot of movement in the next few months, and particularly in places like Iowa. We look forward to doing that. But what she's doing is part of the reason this country is so polarized, and we need to stop that. As president, I'm going to try to bring people together. I'm not Pollyannish about this. I know the far left has a lot of bad things. We're going to do like we did in Florida. We're going to beat the far left. But I really do believe that there's a strong working majority in this country to restore sanity and normalcy, get the people's business done, but not have politics always get us at each other's throats.
You've tried to make the case to Trump followers in trying to win over their primary votes that he's not lived up to his promises on things like the wall. You warn them he may not be there with them on pro-life issues and some others. So do you think his supporters who haven't come over to you yet are unreasonable, unable to think for themselves?
No, I think it's still early. We do this all the time, but like the average person, they get engaged in this as it gets a lot closer to the caucuses and to the primaries. So I think you'll see that. But, for example, on Right to Life, he said that pro-life protections, like in Iowa and Florida, he said it's a terrible thing. And so I think a lot of people were shocked when he said that. Then he was saying in Iowa the other day about building the wall and having Mexico pay for it. Probably the most famous political promise this century, certainly one of in American history. And he said, well, there was never a mechanism for me to have Mexico pay for the wall. He acted like it was never possible to begin with. That was a core promise. The thing is, you actually could have had Mexico pay for it. Not just tell them to pay. Of course not. You impose fees on the remittances that people who are working in America are sending back to Mexico and other countries. It would generate billions of dollars. You'd be able to build the wall. So what I've told people is, I'm the only guy running that I've made good on 100% of my promises. I will do the same as president, and I will even make good on Donald Trump's promises from 2016 that he wasn't able to do.
You have a lot of convincing to do. The polls haven't been moving in the right direction in some of these early states. South Carolina and New Hampshire, you're now third in a lot of those polls to Nikki Haley, trailing her by about 9 points in both of those states. The Messenger says this: DeSantis collapses in New Hampshire polls as backers beg, quote, get your bleep up here. They're quoting somebody specifically. Another GOP strategist is reacting to you moving a big chunk of staff here out of Tallahassee to Iowa. Says this: I think the DeSantis campaign is flashing red. After a really tough summer, the campaign is running on fumes. All going all in Iowa when nothing else has worked does not build confidence. Is Iowa?
That's not true.
Is that a must win for you, though?
No, what they're saying is just not true. We're going to win Iowa. We think that that's very important. We are going to be in New Hampshire a lot more. I think we've got plans to do that, and you'll see all that stuff is very volatile in those early states. We're going to have 4 weeks in South Carolina after New Hampshire between that. So we're going to get the job done, but it does start with Iowa. That's where we're gonna make the mark. But we're gonna be all in on all those states. And all those guys, all the chatter that they do, they've been wrong for years. People were chattering about my reelection as governor, saying we weren't running a good campaign, that we were sputtering, and I won the biggest victory that we've ever seen in the state of Florida for a Republican.
Were you ever down by 40 points?
Huh?
Were you ever down by 40 points?
There were actually polls that had me losing the general election by a few points. Now, I wonder, that's a pretty big miss to be able to do. There were some that had me up just 2 or 3 points. So, we know what the path is. We're going to execute the plan and we're going to get it done.
Let's talk some policy. Ukraine talked about this in the last debate. You said when you were pressed on your position that the U.S. is not going to continue to have a blank check. Wall Street Journal editorial board says this: the governor's blank check line is a red herring. Nobody's offering one. But if the U.S. abandons Kyiv, Russia wins, period. Pitting a defense of the U.S. border against aid for Ukraine is a false choice, since the U.S. can do both if it has the will. So how would you resolve Ukraine?
Well,
let me ask you, are you with Vivek Ramaswamy, who says Putin's going to get to keep some of what he took? If not, what is your solution? Well,
people say, would you give? I wouldn't give Putin anything. I mean, we want to keep Putin in the box. But here's the thing. They've paid for salaries and pensions for Ukrainian bureaucrats. They're paying for agriculture, business stuff. That is a blank check, because that's not what the American people signed up for. First thing. Second thing, they say you can't pit the border against foreign borders. Your first responsibility is to defend this country. And the D.C. elites do not care about our southern border. They don't care about all the deaths that have happened, and they're just letting this happen. So that does matter. You've got to be able to take care of your business here first. Third thing is this. Joe Biden's missing in action. Where's the leadership? Where's the clear statement of the mission? Because people are saying this could go on for many, many years. He says as long as it takes, that is a blank check that's going to go. I served in Iraq back in 2007, 2008. And one of the things I took from that experience is we do good when we have a very concrete mission that we're trying to achieve. And when you do that, you know what you're up against, you know what resources may be needed, and you can get it done. Here, they haven't defined the mission in a concrete way. It's basically an open-ended commitment. And yes, that's not leadership. Also this, Biden is funding both sides of this conflict with his Green New Deal policy. If you want to put the clamp on Putin and Russia, open up America's domestic energy production. We have the best reserves in the world. That would be bad for Russia, bad for Iran, bad for China. He also gave Iran $6 billion and relief sanctions on them. Iran is funding Russia and funding this conflict. So I have the ability to come in. I think we need to end this. I don't think it's in our interest.
But how do you end it? Does Putin keep any of the territory he's taken?
You have to use the leverage that we have available to us, particularly against Russia, China, and Iran. You have to also have the Europeans step up and do more on the military front.
But does Ukraine get everything back?
Well, here's the thing about that. Putin invaded in 2022. I think the president should articulate what's the end point that he's trying to achieve. Is he trying to get them back to February of 2022, or is he trying to get them back to 2013? Those are different missions.
What would President DeSantis do?
We're going to do what's in the best interest of the United States. Ultimately, you don't subcontract out foreign policy to a foreign leader like Zelensky. You got to do what's in our national interest. But we're also going to have this as part of an overall strategic shift where we're focusing on China as our premier threat. The Indo-Pacific, because sometimes people will say that the way to defeat China is to give more for Ukraine, but we don't even have enough firepower in the Indo-Pacific right now. We need more hard power in the Pacific to be able to deny China's ambitions. And we need to do things with the economy and culture. There's a whole host. It's got to be a whole of society approach if we want to check China.
Well, and you've talked about decoupling with them, but the fact is we are very tied to them on a number of industries, including pharmaceutical. Atlantic Council has this estimate. Since 2020, U.S. imports of Chinese pharmaceuticals have grown by 485%. So easier to talk about decoupling than actually make it happen. Is it fair to suggest to voters that that's actually plausible?
I've never said you can just snap your finger and we will decouple everything immediately. You got to be strategic. You got to be methodical. You got to have a plan. I mean, for example, it's one thing to say we don't want to get something from China, but are we going to make it so that you can actually do that and it's economical in the United States? That may require us to do tax incentives and other things to be able to do it. So it's part of a larger, I think, strategic shift that's consistent with our national security. I actually think it could have some economic benefits here at home, but it's not something that will happen overnight.
Up next, Florida's First Lady joins our discussion. Some things you may be surprised about their life at home and on the road with their young family. A look there at the governor's mansion in Tallahassee, where we spent some time with the DeSantis family this week. They are no strangers to the campaign trail. This time, they've got 3 kids in tow, ages 6, 5, and 3. I asked them about juggling all that.
Well, and you know, this time goes by so fast, right? It's like, what do they say? The years are short, the days are long, and it goes by in the blink of an eye. And so even before this interview today, I was out doing a field trip with our 6-year-old and came in here and ran and got ready and tried to come because, you know, and that's why you see them on the campaign trail with us, because we don't want to miss these opportunities.
They're really into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles now. And I remember that when I was a kid.
Too.
So they found that, and like, so my son has a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle costume that he was planning on wearing for Halloween, but then he knows how to get on her phone. He searches Amazon for football stuff. He found a Jacksonville Jaguars Halloween costume. It hasn't arrived yet, so if it arrives, I think he's going to go Jags over Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I love it. He's given himself options. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Shannon Bream. Have a safe week out there. We'll see you next Fox News Sunday.